Hi everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time for episode 236 of Album of the Day, in which for today's album review I'm going to be reviewing the latest album, as well as the third studio album from a rapper who is pretty well known for being part of the rap collective known as Odd Future, which also has the likes of people like Quasimodo and Tyler the Creator. Of course, yeah, I'm talking about the underground rapper known as Earl Sweatshirt, which I believe he's out of California. I'm not so sure, but he is finally back with his first album in a few years, since 2015's I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. This record was released on November 30th, 2018, and the album is called Some Rap Songs, and I recently got this on vinyl. I picked it up from Ka-Chunk in Annapolis, Maryland, one of my favorite record stores, and as you can see, the album cover, this is a kind of shaky, crappy photograph of Earl Sweatshirt's face, but I think it really fits sort of the aesthetic of the album, which I'll go into a little more detail about in a little bit, but show you what it looks like. Which, yeah, I really like how there's a few quotes from him on there, as well as kind of a drawing of him. There's 15 tracks on here, so you may get the impression, oh, this is probably going to be a pretty long record. Wrong. This album is only 25 minutes across 15 tracks, which I think kind of makes sense given there's this new trend in music where there are albums that are only like 22 minutes. Heck, there's even an album full of songs that are all 1 minute, specifically Tierra Whack's Whack World, another great rap album that I do recommend you check out from 2018. And here are the liner notes for all the songs, like who produced it, which majority of the tracks were produced by Earl himself under his alter ego name, Random Black Dude. Also, Standing on the Corner, Denmark Vesey, and Black Noise. And it's interesting, this is sort of like a poem or something like that, and there's someone in that photograph, I'm not sure, it's probably someone in his family, and specifically his father, who actually passed away, and one of the big sort of things looming over this record. And there's side A, and then there's side B. Yeah, this is like a 2018 album, but technically this vinyl is like a 2019 release, because, yeah, this album didn't really get a vinyl release until 2019. And that's the vinyl packaging for Some Rap Songs, the new album by Earl Sweatshirt. Now, I've been aware of Earl in the past a little bit, but I never really digested a full album of his. My first taste of Earl was on the Danny Brown track, Really Doe, which was off of course, Atrocity Exhibition. Fantastic hip-hop record, definitely my favorite of 2016. Go check it out if you haven't yet. Which that one also does feature Kendrick Lamar and Ab-Soul on it. And he did deliver a really interesting verse that sort of delved into some of his life struggles, which I think kind of made sense given the Danny Brown record was a pretty heavy album thematically, in terms of he was talking about his dealings with depression and drug abuse and stuff like that. Like this album is kind of in that vein, but I'd say a little more lo-fi and definitely more sort of condensed to these tight, short little packages, which I think the brevity of this album is actually part of what makes this all these songs so powerful. Is like it makes the impact of them that much more big, that much bigger, I'd say, because this is a pretty big deep dive into some of the darkest and most despondent corners of his psyche, pretty much. Opening track, Shattered Dream, seems to be a song sort of showing that he's got some pretty imprecise stories to tell and stuff like that, because he's really gone through a lot of pretty messed up things in his life. And it only made sense that the first thing you hear on the record is a sample of James Baldwin saying imprecise words. And it features a very soulful sort of sample from the Endeavors track. The Endeavors track of the same name, sort of providing the doo-wop vocals on top of Earl's rapping, along with some really beautiful guitars and kind of jazzy drumming. And then there's also tracks that do sort of deal with quite a bit of loss, especially the death of his father, which is a theme coming through on the track Red Water, which this is basically a continuous 8 bars that is sort of looped 4 times in the song, but it doesn't really need anything more than that to really leave an impact. And it actually sort of shows that this is kind of a circle going around in his head, but a very actually compelling circle. And it goes really well over the very gorgeous sort of broken vocal samples. Yeah, I think it's the kind of trance-like beat going on there works well over the verse. The song Cold Summers is kind of a track about how summer is kind of a time where most people would be out enjoying the weather, but Earl is definitely doing the opposite. He's like working a lot at home, he's sort of secluding himself in the outside world instead of enjoying outside, mostly because of a myriad of different things, including substance abuse as well as home robberies. Like, he has this fear of intruders coming into his house, so he kind of clings to his shotgun a little bit, like, because of his pretty intense fears. Pretty heavy stuff here. So, pretty heavy stuff going on here. While The Mint is a track that sort of shows him kind of trying to find different ways to cope with the depression, whether it be going in the shower or like smoking weed, even though I heard he has a kind of, pretty terrible relationship with weed. Like, it's never really helped him cope with his problems necessarily. Yeah, so necessarily. So he's like so despondent here on this record, and sort of portraying that through some lyrics. It may take a few listens for you to really get the point what he's talking about, and I think that's kind of part of the experience of this album, is how how the songs are so short, you definitely need to pay attention to the lyrics, or else it's just kind of gonna pass, just kind of blur by you a little bit. Not only do I really like Earl's delivery on the track The Mint, but Navy Blues intro is really good, and also I really like the kind of psychedelic jazz piano laden instrumental on there. So he the song Eclipse sort of sees him saying goodbye to his openness as well, hence the name, essentially a metaphor for like he's sort of secluding himself from everyone else. What else? Even though he is sort of talking about his sort of difficult kind of relationships that he has with his peers, like on the track December 24, where he's sort of kind of feeling the need to warn two people that, one of them's pro-violence or something like that. And there's a really clever bar on here where he says, how you want them ribs smoked family, which, of course, yeah, does sound like a reference to, you know, barbecue pork meal, but it's actually a metaphor for, like, kind of like a shotgun that could kind of smoke the ribs, but it also could be a reference to sort of weed, like when you smoke weed, it kind of, you know, does some damage to the ribs. Ribs, and I do really like the kind of somber, dreary beat that the song goes for. Like, the beats on this album are, like, very well produced, and they're definitely kind of lo-fi, but they, you know, the different beat choices are intentionally kind of created to sort of fit the aesthetic of the subject matter of the track. Or track it's on. Meanwhile, the track The Bend sees Earl getting a bit braggadocious and sort of talking about how he and his friends have sort of come, how far they've come since he's been a member of Odd Future, and it does go really well over the kind of over the beat, which does have a really cool kind of soulful, gibberish female vocal sample that I do really like on there. It goes well over the kind of sad strings and kind of sparse percussion. Yeah, percussion on there. There, and another track on here that I think has a really clever sort of reference on there would have to be the song Lucy, which I didn't find this out until looking up about it on Genius, but there's actually a reference to some movie from the 70s that's about this reggae. It's about this struggling singer who eventually turns into, like, you know, this reggae star, but when his producer kind of manipulates him and kind of tries to tell him what to do, he takes to selling weed as well as killing cops. Which I think is very clever and kind of strangely fits in with kind of most of the lyrics on this track. But now, just because this album is incredibly dark and there's a lot really to take in emotionally, it doesn't mean there isn't at least a little bit of optimism in there. The track Veins sort of is Earl realizing how he's just gotta take the good with the bad in order to sort of change and appreciate himself as a person, and he's sort of, you know, letting his mom know that, you know, everything's actually okay and that he's eating well, but even though it could be a metaphor for, like, how his wealth's doing, and he's, you know, trying to escape Trump land, which of course references, you know, his supporters kind of very openly sort of displaying their racism and bigotry, and stuff like that, and also sort of making a very haunting statement by saying that when his burnt body's ready to be when his, like, body's ready to be burnt after he's died, like, tell my mom I said thank you. He's sort of talking about how the impact of his mother is another pretty big theme that kind of, you know, is very omnipresent throughout this record. I mean, she hasn't passed away or anything like that, but she definitely is kind of a little bit of, like, she's kind of the omnipresent spirit on this record. Excuse me. And I'll tell you, and following the track Veins, which also I will say has really gorgeous Curtis Mayfield sample on it, is the very haunting and very impactful interlude Playing Possum, which features some spoken word from his parents. There's his mother sort of thanking his family and stuff like that. And meanwhile, there's also clips of his late father reading a poem that he wrote. wrote as well. It's like very gorgeous and a very sort of and definitely a very emotionally gripping sort of thing to put towards the end of the album. I can see that Earl intended it to be a surprise, kind of like a little Easter egg that people could find when they listen to this album, and I'm glad that he kept it that way, because otherwise it wouldn't have been as impactful as it really is. And the kind of sad orchestral arrangements in the instrumental, I think, suit it perfectly. And like I said, definitely some incredible beats to be found on here. There's a few more that I certainly would like to highlight that I think complement Earl's delivery incredibly well. Like the song Azucar features really beautiful sweeping strings that are worked into it, while the song Eclipse features a kind of cute little xylophone tinged kind of instrumental. It actually has a little bit of a carnival music kind of vibe to it, just a little sadder. Just a little sadder. And the closing track, Riot, I definitely think, despite not having any lyrics on it, is the perfect way to close the album. Gorgeous, very kind of depressing trumpet sample on there. That's which the sample on this track is actually from a song of the same name, written and performed by the jazz legend and friend of Earl's father, Hugh Masekela. And I think this sample to end the record is a really perfect way to end the album, considering this is sort of, kind of showing that, his father's gone, but he's still going to be like a pretty omnipresent spirit. So like, who knows how Earl is going to follow up this record. There are definitely a lot of pretty strong points on this album. There are a couple of sort of points here that I'm not quite as fond of that I'd like to talk about. The track Nowhere to Go. Pretty decent track overall, but given how strong a good chunk of other songs here are, the fact that this one was released as one of the teaser tracks is a little bit of a disappointment, considering that lyrically it isn't quite as potent, though the beat on there is pretty nice. And the track Peanut, which while I have sort of found out that it is a pretty complex deep dive into his mind, and I do really respect that, but just the beat on here and kind of how fragmented the song feels is definitely a little underwhelming. In my opinion. But overall, really excellent record right here. This is an album that is just so kind of curious and sort of strange that initially I didn't really know what to think of it when I heard just little clips of it, but then of course, critics were raving about it, and I became a little more curious about it, and I'm glad that I decided to give it a listen, because it's definitely one of the better underground rap records I've heard in 2018. I'm definitely feeling a strong 8 on this album. This is a kind of record where, if you're an Earl Sweatshirt fan, I think you're going to really appreciate how this is probably some of his best writing to date. But even if you're sort of new to the guy, I think some rap songs would be a pretty good place to start, because this is kind of my first full-length Earl Sweatshirt album I've really gotten to digest. It's definitely a record that, it's a pretty short record that may be a little bit of an issue for some people, but personally, like I said, I think it makes the impact of the record that much more glaring, I think, and that's sort of definitely a compliment to Earl Sweatshirt. So that's my review of the new Earl Sweatshirt record, some rap songs, and I'll see you for episode 237.